Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Peters. I'm home in my office, but in theory, this is the Poison Pen. And it's really a pleasure to launch Rhys Bowen's newest romantic suspense book, The Venice Sketchbook. And as you can see from the little label, Rhys has already autographed all our copies. It doesn't go on sale till Tuesday, but it's not too late to order one. And it's really exciting. This is the hardcover, but I should add that there is also a paperback edition of it simultaneously. So if you want to choose that one, you could do that as well. So welcome, Rhys.
Hello, Barbara. It's the launch party, so it's not champagne because it's the middle of the afternoon, but it's my, oh, you've got one too.
I do. I was going to drink a toast to you. Absolutely.
And let me show you something. You showed the book. Have you seen inside the cover?
Why don't you show us?
If you take the outside cover off, look what's there.
Isn't that gorgeous? It's St. Mark's, right?
Yeah, and the sketch is mine.
Is it really?
Yeah. When we were talking about covers, I said, "Do you want to take a look at the sketches I do?" And I sent sent my sketches, and she said, "Oh, we love this one. We're going to do it. We're going to use it somehow." And so you take off the cover, and there it is. I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
It's absolutely gorgeous. And here, excuse me, is the title page that Rhys has signed. Yeah. So everybody will know it's authentic. Sadly, Rhys is not in Venice, but rather here in Phoenix. But let's talk about, we brought a little touch of Italy to this performance. So I am wearing my, if you can see them, my glass earrings that I bought on Lake Como. They had a beautiful glassworks shop. And in general, I wanted to look as though I were out for a night in Venice in 1928, which is where this book begins. But Rhys has got even more exciting jewelry on it.
This is my Murano glass. It doesn't do it justice because it's so sparkly, really. It's sort of got gold in each of them. But these are Murano glass beads from the island of Murano, which is next to Venice, one of the islands next to Venice. And you can go there and you can watch them blowing glass. And my heroine covets some beads and finally buys herself some in the middle of the book and leaves them to her great niece. So Murano glass pictures in the story.
It does indeed. Now there's the only time that I was in Venice some years ago, it was June, and it was so hot you could barely breathe and so crowded you were elbowing your way along. So my husband and I decided that the way to solve that was to take the Vaporetto, and cruise around the islands in the lagoon for the breeze and whatever. Yeah. Murano is the glass island. Burano is famous, or was famous, if I remember right, for lace making. Is that right?
And Torcello too. Torcello is the other.
Right. And of course, there's some wonderful mosaics. And then there's the cemetery island. Yeah, Venice is wonderful, and the waterways, not just the canals in the city, but the other waterways are a lot of fun to explore. But tell us, because I love your opening scene. So you have this young woman. Wait, you know what? Let me stop a minute and let's make an announcement, because I meant to do this and I'm afraid I'm going to forget. Rhys is the author of 2 best-selling series. Her Royal Spinus, Lady Georgie, and before that, the Molly Murphy series, in addition to these wonderful standalones that she's now writing. But she has an important announcement to make about Molly Murphy.
Well, every week I get letters saying, when is there going to be another Molly book? We're missing Molly. And I've had to say, I only have 2 hands. I can't write any faster than I am, and I can't fit it in right now. Well, this year there is going to be, early next year, another Molly book coming out, because I am co-writing now with my wonderful daughter, Claire, who is a brilliant writer. And she was the one, she came to me and she said, I think we could do Molly together. I think I could do a really good job. So I said, okay, let's see. She came up with a really terrific idea for the first book. And I was expecting to have to hold her hands, and say, well, we need a little more tension here, and we don't. She just took it and run with it. She'd say, well, I've handled the party scene and then the 3 scenes after that. And I go, brilliant. And she really, I can't tell now which was mine and which was hers if I look through And that's a real big compliment to her. So it was a joy to write with her. And so now the series is going to continue, and we have the next one coming out early next year, and it's called Wild Irish Rose. And
Love the title.
Yeah, Claire's brilliant idea was that we should mirror her own experience coming to Ellis Island. What if another young woman like Molly comes to Ellis Island and there's a murder while she's there and no one will believe her? And Molly, of course, went through her own experience, so she's determined to prove her innocence. So that's the start of this next story. It's a really good one.
It's a wonderful start. What year are you in, Rhys?
1907.
Okay, so we're not motoring along too fast through the turn of the 20th
we're actually
century.
only 2 months after the last one, which was Ghost of Christmas Past. I said to Claire, if we get really fed up with this, there is the Titanic in 1911. We can put her on that.
That's a cruel thought, but you're absolutely right. She could, but then of course she'd have to decide if she'd be one of the survivors or not, because not everybody actually died on the Titanic.
It was the steerage passengers, unfortunately, that did, because there were no lifeboats.
Right. No, it was awful. But let me think, is that going to be the 19th Molly Murphy?
18th.
18th.
Yeah.
That's just amazing that, you have written so many of those along with all of these other books, but you must be delighted to be able to continue it without doing the whole load yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm really glad to bring her back. I knew I couldn't do 3 books a year. And so, Claire has taken the load off my shoulders, and having proved in this first book how well she can handle it, I will step back more and more and just be like a mentor. So that will be good.
I think it's fascinating that, because I know you've told me this before we're talking today, that when you read through it, you couldn't work out who wrote what.
No, I couldn't. No. And she couldn't either. She said, that the other day, she said, that scene was so-and-so. Was that my scene? And I said, I'm really not sure. So, that's a compliment to both of us. I think that she picked up Molly's voice instantly, which was really good.
That is wonderful. And now, before we talk, one more thing. When is the next Royal Spinus book slated to come out?
Oh, yeah. That's coming out in October. And it's a Christmas book. Berkeley begged me to do another Christmas book, which they're such fun to do. Right. But this one takes place at Sandringham, where the royal family are having Christmas. And it's a lovely English Christmas of the best sort, with crackling fires and holly and Christmas puddings, just with the addition of a few bodies. So
well, the last one you had 12 clues, so we were following.
I'm not going to kill off 12 people this time. That was quite a challenge, to kill them all off in the correct way on the right day of Christmas. This one's not quite as many bodies, and it's called God Rest Ye Royal Gentlemen.
Oh, that's a wonderful title, and sadly very appropriate today with the death of Prince Philip yesterday.
Yeah. Well, and also, actually, in the book I'm writing, it's Christmas 1905. So, of course, in January, King George is going to die. So I'm very aware of that when I'm writing the book.
Wait, January 1935, right?
1935, yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
1935.
Right.
Right. Wrong season. I've moved ahead, right? 1935, yes. So King George is going to die in the middle of January. And then, of course, the Prince of Wales is going to take the throne. And we're going to have the whole Mrs. Simpson drama. And so that's lurking in a next book or so.
Well, you're going to love writing that, because you've been trailing after Mrs. Simpson for many books. So.
But the only thing is, once he's stepped down and she's gone, how do I bring her into my books? Of course, I can bring her into a wonderful one when they go to Germany. Wouldn't that be fun?
It would. No, there's a lot of possibility there. And, thinking about it and thinking about all that drama of, nearly a century ago with Mrs. Simmons, and then thinking about the drama of the royal family at the moment with another American. And it makes you wonder, how people will look back and view where we are now in 50 years and what we will have to, and what, I wish I were younger, because there's so many things that I would love to live long enough to find out what goes on, but not going to happen. Right. So now, finally, the Venice sketchbook. Yep, there we go. You have really loved doing these romantic suspense books. like me, I think, aren't you a great fan of Mary Stuart and Victoria Holt and books like
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. And more recently, Kate Morton. I love
Yes.
like The Forgotten Garden and The Secret Keeper. And what I love is books where you are in 2 or 3 time periods and you have a story in the present and the story in the past and they're parallel. And you get, it's like peeling away the onion. You get tiny little snippets of what might have happened until you can put it together in both of them. That's really fun to write.
It is fun to write, and you have a particular fondness for World War II stories. Your timeline often
Yeah,
pivots around events in the war.
yeah, yeah. Um, you know, the idea, the germ behind this book happened long ago when my aunt was, I have a very prim and proper aunt, a very English spinster. And she used to go to Italy a lot, but she went to Venice every single Easter. And when I was a sort of romantic teenager, I remember thinking, why does she go every Easter? Why? I wonder if she meets someone there. What if she met someone there and we never knew about him? So there, that was long ago. But what gave me the impetus this time was I was in Venice a couple of years ago, and we went to the Biennale, which is the huge open air art festival where all the different countries have a pavilion, and you just walk around through the Giardini, and there are all the pavilions. And I found out that it had been held in 1940 and in 1942. And I thought, who went? The world was at war. You know, was it just the Germans going down to Italy in 1940? Certainly wasn't the Russians in 1942. So I was very intrigued, and I thought it'd be interesting to write something about Venice still having its classic art exhibitions when the whole rest of the world was at war. So that's what started this.
What a really intriguing thought. I didn't realize. I mean, I've been to the Biennale that one time that I was in Venice, and it was very modern. Had, lots of light tubes and video and
Yeah, yeah,
that sort of
yeah.
modern art. But I didn't think it ever occurred to me that they were hosting it during the war.
No, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, I can imagine 1940s still because America hadn't entered the war. So maybe there was an American pavilion. The Russians were still on the side of the Germans. And of course, Italy and Germany had teamed up. So there were enough people to go to it. But 1942, there was nobody. There were German pictures of handsome peasants in the fields making hay. You know, that was about it. And part of the story has to do with someone like Paul Klee, who is Jewish and is no longer welcome in Germany, and who has, is taking his art elsewhere now. And so Venice, because both sides agreed not to bomb. So there you had this little oasis of calm and serenity and art in the middle of a crazy war. And the Venetians by nature are very tolerant. So the Jews had a very easy time to start with. They weren't forced to wear the yellow star. They kept a low profile, but nobody didn't think. It was only when Italy changed sides and the Germans came in and took Venice that suddenly there were these terrible reprisals. And so, that's what my story's about.
Well, Venice is the home of the original ghetto, which
Yeah,
it was an old iron foundry,
yeah,
and the Jews were. I have been through that. There are still. I'm trying to remember how many synagogues within.
yeah.
At least 3. I'm thinking 5 for some reason, but I might be wrong. But in any case, a contained part of the city, and they could close the gates
Yeah.
and keep them inside, and that I think goes all the way back to what, the 14th century or something. 13th?
What
Okay.
really, really good restaurants in that part of the city because it's off the tourist route and therefore they're very laid back. And a lot of them you just sit on the sidewalk outside the restaurant and they'll bring you the spaghetti with the seppi with the octopus ink, and things. So it's a good place to eat.
But I mean, a city with a very long tradition of housing its Jewish citizens. So, the war
Yeah.
and the whole Holocaust thing would have been a tremendous trauma.
Yeah.
But you open the book in 1928. So, and that's a really nice scene. So why don't you tell us, there are no spoilers going to be involved here. Why don't you
Yeah.
tell us about how the book opens?
Well, we start off the book in 1928 when Juliet Browning, known as Letty to her family, is taken to Venice by her very prim and proper aunt, who I have to say I'm channeling Aunt Gladys when I write this. She comes out of the station and she says, "Ecco il canale grande." And that's exactly as my aunt would have said it. So she takes Juliet to Italy for her 18th birthday. And of course, Juliet at that time is wide-eyed and hopeful and looking forward to going to art school, wants to be a painter, and the world seems to be open for her. And she has a chance to go off sketching on her own and sees a box floating past and hears noises coming from it and realizes it's a box full of kittens that they've thrown in to drown. So of course, being a young English girl, she jumps in to save them, only to realize when she's put them up on the walkway that there are no steps, there's no way up. So there she's stuck in the canal and could easily drown. And she tries to think what the Italian word for help is. And she tries to remember her Latin class, would it be the same? But then a motorboat comes past and the driver of the motorboat spots her and pulls her out. And he says, "You must be English." And she says, "How did you know?" And he says, "Only an English girl would be stupid enough to go swimming in a canal." So that's how she meets Leonardo, who is a dashing and, as we find out, a very rich, very, very powerful Italian. And the story continues throughout the whole book.
Well, I mean, they're both very young.
Yeah.
And I love the way that she, I mean, this is not a spoiler because we're once again in the opening scene. Despite her aunt's strictures, she really wants to explore the city and not just sit in the hotel and have tea and, be English while they're there. So she has a rendezvous, an innocent one, with this young man. And to do that, she has to what? Climb out of her hotel room, right?
She does, yeah. I mean, can you imagine, wouldn't you go? You were very, you're 18 years old and you're in Italy, and aunt says, this is what my aunt said: "A lady never goes out after dinner unescorted." So that's what my aunt said. So they're sitting in the hotel after dinner, they go up to bed, and then she hears something thrown at her shutters of her window, and there he is in his boat down below, and he helps her climb out. I mean, I would have gone too.
Absolutely. My first visit to Italy, I was 15 and traveling with my grandmother, and I wasn't quite as brave as, well, actually I was. Anyway, let's say that I too ventured out. And nothing terrible happened. It was an interesting time, Rhys, thinking about it, because it was 1955 and Europe had not been able yet to recover from the war. I mean, so much damage in the major cities. London eventually was able to rebuild the East End. I've been to Hamburg, which was, flattened and is now thriving, much of Germany. But in 1955, there was the war was, the traces of it were absolutely everywhere.
I went across for the first time, my first time in Europe. I went across to stay with friends in Vienna in 1954, and it had just split between, it was one of those cities, it was between the Russians, the English, and the Americans all had a part of Vienna. They just moved out, so Vienna was pretty much just sort of emerging. And there were things like, we went to this little castle in the middle of a lake, and the Russians had been there, and they had slashed, it had leather embossed walls, they'd slashed all the leather walls. So things like that, just senseless violence and destruction everywhere. So the Venetian, the Venice, Viennese were still very much suffering from the war. I was lucky because I was on a farm, so we had plenty to eat and everything, but I gather not everybody did. So when you think of it, I think I was 12 going on 13, and they put me on a train in London, and I went to Vienna by myself.
But that's what I was going to say, is that in many ways, it was a much more innocent time, despite all the ravages of war and the violence, the horrible things that happened. I never felt like I was going to be in any danger if I, stepped out after my grandmother went to bed. And, with company, I don't know that I would have gone out by myself I was fortunate that, I was with other people. I think it probably would have been truly foolhardy to have stepped out into the streets at age 15, at night
Yeah.
without anybody. But I don't think, I mean, I don't know. I'm thinking back, growing up north of Chicago in the suburbs, I had a really feral childhood by today's standards. We didn't think anything of taking off on our bikes after breakfast and coming home after dark. Nobody knew, there wasn't any GPS or tracking or cell phones or anything. Nobody knew where you were. And you always felt like you could ask adults for help if you needed to. And, it was just, it's astonishing to me how much it's changed in the last however many years it's been, 60 anyway, close to 70 now.
I mean, exactly the same thing. I lived out in the middle of the country, and I get on my bike and my mother would say, come back before it's dark. They never said, where are you going? They never said, who are you going with? It just, we went out, and the fact that they could trust me go across Europe on a train, and people in my carriage would see a young girl alone and they'd offer me some salami, and, it was all, and I think even in Italy and then later in Greece, men would flirt. Men might even pinch your bottom.
Yes.
It was harmless. It was like a scoring point, and you never felt in that very bad danger. In Italy, we got, in Greece, when I was about 18, 19, first year of college, a friend and I went with a backpack for 3 months around Greece. And everywhere we went, they didn't allow their own women out at all. People would try and pick us up. You come with me, you beautiful girl, But they took, when you said no, that was that, it was, there was a limit. And I know we were in a bus station once. We got rather good by the end of 3 months. And a man came up and he said, I like your friend. You tell her she spend tonight with me. So I called all the way down the bus station. Ruth, he says, would you like to spend tonight with him? And she went, no, thank you. And he crept away.
Well, yeah, I remember having a very sore butt and during a train ride because, they would go by and sort of pinch. It wasn't a Me Too time either. I mean, there was not that instant outrage that I think people would feel today. But anyway, I brought all that up because I understand why Letty would have, would have gone over down the wall and sailed off with Leonardo for, their evening picnic and all the rest of it, and it wouldn't have felt dangerous.
No.
Well, and then her aunt, of course, totally overreacts because naturally she's espied by somebody, Letty, for having dropped over the wall, and her aunt is just beyond outraged and jerks her away from Venice. And what a shame, because it really could have been so different if there'd been more tolerance on the aunt's part. But in any case, so that's where we start. And then Letty comes back to Venice, 10 years later?
Yes, she does. I mean, her life in 10 years is not what she thought it was going to be. She thinks she's going to go to art college and then maybe make her mark as an artist, and then everything changes. The first scene is 1928. So we have 1929, the Great Crash. Right. Family loses money. Father, who has been sick since the Great War, eventually dies. And so mother, very dependent mother, and Letty has to drop out of college and get a job to look after her mother. So she thinks her world has shrunk to this little village, looking after mother, teaching at a girls' school. But she gets a chance to take the girls to Venice on a cultural holiday. So she jumps at it and she goes back to Venice, never expecting to see Leo again, and then does bump into him.
And we go from there, but much of the story takes place decades later.
Yeah.
And not through Letty's eyes, but through the eyes of, what is it, her niece?
A great niece, Caroline.
Great niece. Okay.
Yeah. So the other story, it's really two women with parallel lives, because her great niece, Caroline, when we find her, it starts in 2001 with the Twin Towers coming down. And Caroline has also not had the life she thought she was going to have. She has been to art college, and she studied fashion design, and she's very talented. And she marries another student because she's pregnant. And suddenly her life is confined to being a mom, having a rather menial job, while her husband is still madly creating and goes off to America to compete in a competition, meets someone else, and dumps Caroline. So Caroline finds herself dumped. And what's more, their child is over there, and it looks as if he's trying to keep their child. So that's where Caroline starts the story.
Wow, you really like to torture these women.
Torture them, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, if a life is going smoothly, there's not much to write about. So, but, you know, it's sad to think about, you know, someone young with life opening up and full of promise, and then circumstances intervene, and the dreams they had are frustrated or cut short. So then the real question is there a second chance for them, or a second chance for not the life maybe they envisioned, but a life that they will enjoy that goes on a different track?
Well, and that's the other parallel. Letty gets a second chance of sorts, which doesn't turn out well, as we know. But Caroline also is, through her great aunt, is given that second chance. And one has to think that the great aunt wanted her to have that second chance, because Caroline goes to her great aunt as she's dying. She's now a woman of over 90, and she's dying, and she insists that Caroline take a box, small cardboard box, and inside there are 3 keys and a sketchbook of Venice. So Caroline thinks that what her aunt wants is for her to scatter her ashes in Venice. And nobody's ever known before that she even had a life in Venice. So Caroline goes to Venice to scatter the ashes. And then, of course, she finds out what the keys open. And I can say no more, as I'd have to keep
No. But, you know, you really like this structure. You have written, I think Farleyfield stayed, didn't it stay really in the same time?
Yes. Farleyfield was much more thriller, in that we have a fairly compressed timeline, and you're counting down all the time to find out what the secret is. But the Tuscan Child was exactly like this. You had someone in the present and someone in the past, and you went back between the two of them.
And you had the effect of the war, you know, how it changed lives so dramatically. And what is it about World War II that fascinates you so much?
Well, one thing, I was born in the middle of it. I don't remember much, because I think I wasn't even 3 when it ended. But it's in my psyche. I still react badly if I hear a siren go off, you know, one of those woo, and still if I see searchlights, my heart rate goes up. And I knew, apparently, when I was 1, I knew the difference in sound between our planes and enemy planes. And if I heard enemy planes in the distance, I had to get my little wooden stool and go and sit behind one of the big oak doors, so that if the glass blew in, the glass wouldn't blow all over me. So, you know, survival mode very early on. I think what really fascinates me is it's the last occasion where we actually have a case of good versus evil. You know, every war since then, the Vietnam, Iraq, Kuwait, they've all been tinged with gray. Are we doing the right thing? Are we not doing the right thing? You can argue both ways. But World War II was clearly, this is a monster who will swallow the world. And if we do not stop him, you know, it will be the end of us. So I think everybody felt they had to do their part. And most people sacrificed tremendously, were anxious to join the army, went off, did very brave things. And there were a few people who betrayed. There were a few people who made a lot in the black market. So you had the very good and the very bad. And you had people you thought would be ordinary, decent people who were suddenly called upon to do things that were terrible. And to start with, they resisted, and after a while, it became second nature. And you think of someone who became a guard at a prison camp, you know, one of the concentration camps in Germany. A lot of those went home to their wives and kids at night. How could they do that? But they did. So, you know, analyzing what makes a person act the way they do in a war like that time of heightened emotion, of heightened duty, what would make you choose to risk danger? Letty risks tremendous danger. What would make her do that? Why would she not say, thanks, I don't think this is for me? But she does. So, you know, it's interesting to see how people handle war.
Absolutely. And in the current wave of books set in World War II, the majority of them right now are women's stories. You know, after the war, there were a lot of thrillers, Alistair MacLean, The Guns of Navarone, books like that, where you were really looking at the military operations and, you know, fighting men and, you know, the bridges over the River Kwai. I mean, we've been talking really about the European theater, but the Asian theater, the Japanese theater, was one of the things that made the war so horrendous. It really was global with that axis with Germany and Japan.
Yeah, we have John has family members, two of them who were in the prisoner of war camp in Singapore, you know, where they starved people to death. They came home like skeletons. So, you know, I'm very aware of all that. I just don't have the expertise to write about that. I know Europe very well. So, you know, that's easy for me to write about, but I have no expertise in what would be to write about a Japanese psyche or anything. It's very foreign to me.
And no, I wasn't suggesting that you would. You know, my author, Sulari Gentle, whose books you've read and whose books, like me, you like, has made me aware of the Australian and theater during the 30s. And, you know, the same forces that were at work in Europe were very much at work, but we're not that familiar with them. You know, I didn't know much about fascism in Australia or communism or, you know, the far right or the left or whatever. We tend to focus on what's familiar, or where we have resources to study or to read it. But I mean, it really was a global war. There was nowhere that wasn't involved in it. But I do think it's interesting that there are all kinds of stories about women's lives, whether, you know, whatever work they were doing. You wrote one about the land girls, you know.
That
which
was
one was that?
The Victory Garden. That one was
Right.
World War I, but it was the same. It was the same thing of women being called to do things they didn't think they could do. And I think, you know, all the heroism of World War II was given to men. And it's only fairly recent. I mean, look at the women pilots in America, the ones who flew those giant planes across the country. And if those planes crashed, they even had to pay, the family had to pay to have their bodies shipped back. They weren't even given a proper funeral because they weren't officially in the military. So, I mean, women did so much. And the Bletchley Park women who probably saved God knows how many convoys across the Atlantic. Nobody knew about them until fairly recently. So I think finally, and the worst of all were the young women who were parachuted into France as spies. Their chance of survival was probably like 25%. And yet they kept on volunteering to do it.
But so there were also women, you know, on the home front. I mean, people had to raise food, people had to, you know, had to cook and school children and provide medical care. There's a really interesting, years ago, I remember reading a book by John Lawton called Blackout, which is set in London. And it was really about the difficulties of policing during the war, because, you know, somebody still needed to maintain civilian law and order. And that was hard because if he wasn't in a fighting uniform, people tended to do that World War I thing, you know, with a white feather and why aren't you?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
But in point of fact, it was necessary to have somebody maintaining stability and law and order. So I think what we're finding now is the ordinary lives, you know, keeping the library going, or, you know, that kind of thing. A lot of quiet heroism, not the thrilling, you know, landing on the beach and assaulting caves and shooting planes out of the sky or whatever, but people who kept life going, so that, you know, so that everybody who could would survive.
Well, yeah, my mother was a teacher and had to keep on teaching all through the war because obviously the men weren't there. But she had to do her share of fire watching, which meant you had to spend a night on the roof of the school walking up and down, so that if some sort of incendiary bomb dropped on the roof, you had to go and stamp it out before it caught fire to the school. I mean, things like that were not easy.
No, I'm sure, and you know, I'm sure there was an omnipresent sense of danger. So I mean, you could never really escape it, wherever you were. I mean, we were lucky here in America because we were not an actual war theater. So while we sent people to fight and terrible things happened and there were, deprivations in civilian life, we didn't actually have to worry about troops storming into the village or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the Venice sketchbook is a really it's a wonderful look at the city in ways that it has not been portrayed very often. So, since you're so fascinated with doing these one-offs, what inspires you to a particular story? You've already told us this was about your great aunt, but what triggers you off onto one of these standalone novels?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Tuscan one, I suppose, was I taught a workshop 2 summers in Tuscany. So I was very aware, there were books that I read, very aware of how the Tuscan towns suffered under German occupation. So, and I also read an autobiography of an English pilot who had come down in Italy and who had been hidden by a local woman at great danger to herself. So I had those stories. And, while I was there, I was very aware. I was making note of what do you see here? What do you smell here? All the things that bring a book to life. But obviously it's the characters too. You want to write about someone who, in the case of the Venice sketchbook, of 2 women who are brave in spite of what life has thrown at them, and who turn tragedy into triumph in many ways. So it's and then the chance to go and do research in Venice is not bad either. So.
No, it's not. But you're so experienced writing series, and that comes with its own set of things that you have to do. You have to remember the ensemble cast. You've created characters. You can't really change them once you've said how old they are, or or they have children or whatever. You can't go back and rewrite it. But it's also a lot of work to do world building per book. When you're starting right at zero. So are you finding that right now to be as much or more fun than writing a series?
The nice thing about a standalone novel is you get to walk away at the end. You can leave these people in what you hope will be a good place. And then you say, okay, that's that story done. Let's go somewhere else now. And then everybody will write to me and say, is there going to be a sequel to the Venice sketchbook? What's going to happen at the end to Caroline? And I want to know. I've had, In Farley Field was the one I left an open ending to, that I thought maybe we want to go back, and because we had so many points of view and they were all doing different things, maybe we could do something else with that. But the others I finished in what I hope was a good place, and then I walked away. Whereas when you're doing a series, the nice thing is each time you go back, it's like a family reunion. You know everybody, you know what sort of things they say, you know what they're going to do in certain circumstances. So it's much easier. And it's very, very comforting to know that I can handle this. I know what these people are like. Yeah, the only thing is you don't want to get it samey. You don't want to have, you don't want to have the same story repeated 18 times. You want to surprise them. You want them to grow. You want them to be really challenged. You want them to suffer. And so coming up with that for each of the books is a challenge. But the standalones are really nice because you can build this world, all the little details of Venice and all the little details about what you find there and the festivals and everything else. And you can walk away again. I like that.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there was a tremendous popularity for books like Mary Stuart, or as I mentioned earlier, Victoria Holt, or where they wrote. It was kind of a brand in a sense that you had a certain set of expectations coming to it as a reader. That you would, I mean, in Mary Stuart, for example, there was almost always 2 men, and you weren't sure which of them was going to turn out to be the stalwart one, the good guy, and which one of them was going to turn out to be the betrayer. And when that was written, there wasn't really a great reason to follow them into the future life. As you say, she brought them to a place and left them, generally a good place, but not always. And the English writer, the mystery writer Josephine Tay is a bit like that. If you think about her books, even though she had a repeating character, they were much more of a standalone. In fact, the franchise affair, Brad Farrar,
Yeah.
Was over and done. The thing I think would be hard if you're writing a series and you found a way around that is that occasionally a story might come to you where the characters in the series that you have established couldn't possibly pursue the story. It just wouldn't fit everything you have already, designed for them.
That's the reason for standalones. When you're writing the series, and obviously I've been writing both series for quite a few years, I would come up with ideas like I'd love to do something in Farley Field, for example. I would love to do something about the British aristocrats in World War II and those who were helping Hitler. But then that wouldn't fit into my Georgie books for many, many years. So, so I have to put these little things on the back. But in fact, I came up with the idea for In Farley Field in the early 2000s. And I wrote what was the first chapter and I sent it to my then agent. And she came back to me and she said, nobody's interested in World War II. And and I think it's rather insulting that you're writing about people having a nice, easy time in England when everybody's suffering so much on the continent. So I put it aside. I did get a new agent, but
obviously so, right?
But and for years I put it aside, and then I felt I was established enough in my career that I could, because it's a risk to take it to do a standalone. If you've got two series that people love, it's a risk to do a standalone that people might not love. And I don't think the standalones have necessarily sold as well as the series. But I wanted to do it. I showed my agent, and she thought she liked it. And we showed it to both my publishers, both of whom didn't want to touch it. One said it's too far from your brand, and the other one said it's not funny. Well, no, it's not funny. It's about the middle of World War II. So we went. My agent said, "I know who'd love this," and that was Danielle Marshall at Lake Union, and I've been blissfully happy with her ever since. So.
Well, it's wonderful that you've reached a point where you can have it all. You got Claire.
Yes.
It's great. So you and Claire together are keeping Molly Murphy going. You're having a great time with Lady Georgie and her family, and you get to write these standalone stories as they occur to you. I mean, the pace at which you have been producing work is really prodigious. So obviously your mind is constantly churning out story ideas.
I'm not very good at being bored, I'm the sort of what would I do if I didn't write every day? I'm the sort of person, we go on holiday and the first morning I sit there under an umbrella and let someone bring me a pina colada. And by the next day I'm saying to John, okay, there's a Spanish class at 10 and then we can take out a canoe. And then by lunchtime we will do, I've got the day planned. So that's me. I have to accept that I need to be busy and I do have ideas. I think that's something I'm really blessed with is that I keep coming up with things I'd love to write about. And I think, oh, wouldn't it be fun to... You got me started on something that I'm toying with for the future, not this year, not next year, but, which is Australia. My parents lived in Australia. I got married in Australia. I know Australia very well. And it has that great vibe of its own that hasn't really been tackled that much. So I'd love to take one of my characters to Australia at some time.
I think that's a wonderful idea. Well, you're very fortunate that you're a writer who's just has ideas bubbling all the time, and you have the energy and enough success with your publishers that you can do all this. It's wonderful. I mean, we've been friends and doing this together for almost 30 years now, 25 anyway, I think. And it's really been fun to watch because I mean, I first met you when you were writing Evan, in the little
On my first time at your bookstore, there were two men, there were Lewis and Monty and you, three people.
Well, you're not alone. There are many authors who have had that same experience. Not everybody, gets to start with a bang. And there, sometimes it takes a body of work, not just one novel. Today, there's so much hype around, an opening novel. I had a very interesting discussion with Gillian Flynn and Dennis Lane a couple of weeks ago, which you can watch on our Facebook Zoom, about how difficult, or not, let me rephrase that, about how to follow a hugely successful book. What is it that you would do? Dennis with Mystic River, Gillian with Gone Girl.
Yeah.
And that's a different path than if you write, a number of books and you gradually acquire a loyal audience. So there are all kinds of different paths towards success. Why don't we see if Patrick King would like to emerge from the black hole called the poison pen? There he is.
Oh,
Hi, do we have questions?
all right. We do actually have a few questions coming in from the audience. One of which came in early in the session, and Rhys, some of the audience wants to know what you're currently reading during the pandemic.
Well, during the worst of the pandemic, I went back to all my old favorites. I read all the Mary Stuart, as Barbara can tell you. I read the whole Chronicles of Narnia. I've emerged from that now. And now one of my problems is that when you get known for a certain genre, people ask you to blurb all the time. So a lot of the things I've done, I've just blurbed. I've just read a book by Tessa Arlen's new book about the royal governess, which was very interesting because it's not a mystery. It's just a historical, really biopic sort of thing of Princess Elizabeth's governess and what happened to her. I can't remember, it's around somewhere, but I can't see what the title was. I'm now in the middle, finally, of Louise Penny's latest one, All the Devils Are Here, the one that takes place in Paris. I just haven't had time to read it before, but I'm reading that now. I found, until I feel a bit more secure with my vaccines, that I didn't want anything that was too disturbing. I needed something that was secure enough. And of course, Louise and Gamache are completely wonderful universals, where you know all the characters. You see their son and daughter in Paris, and his old friend, and so it's like visiting old family each time.
So comfort reading essentially is what you're saying.
Absolutely, yes.
Hank Philippi Ryan would like to know, did you know the whole story of the Venice sketchbook before you started? And she was hoping you could talk a little bit about your drawings.
Oh, my drawings, yeah. No, I didn't know the whole story to start with. I wasn't quite sure what might happen I didn't even know whether it might be a happy ending for Letty or a sad ending for Letty. I knew she would go to Venice. I knew she would meet someone. I knew she would fall in love. I knew she would be trapped there in World War II. And I knew Caroline would have some sort of impetus to go and find out what happened to her aunt. I knew that much. So we went on from there. And it was only really when I was writing those last scenes, which were really harrowing for me to write, when you have a character you like and you're going to make them suffer, it's hard. It's really hard. And but that's the way it went. So that filled in. And the whole, when you're in a place, bits of the story fill in. I was across on the Lido, which is the island where the casino is and the beaches, and I walked past this villa that was really dilapidated and old. And I thought, I wonder who lived there. I wonder who lived there in World War II. And I thought, what if she was a contessa and she was a patron of the arts? And then I thought, what if she was a Jewish contessa and a patron of the arts? And so therefore, the contessa comes in and plays a big part in the story. So she hadn't been planned to start with. So I love things like that, when someone just walks in and says, hello, here I am. But the sketches, everywhere I go, whenever I go on a travel, I take a sketchbook and a little box of watercolors and pens with me, and I sit and sketch everywhere. And, that's the way that a trip really means something to you. You can take all the photos in the world, but when I look back and I see a sketch I've done, I know exactly where I was sitting and what was going on and everything, because you're so focused on what you're drawing. And so I paint watercolors too, and perhaps that's why all my characters are artists. I'm a frustrated artist. I probably should have gone to art school instead of anything else.
Did you have any formal art training, Rhys, or is this something that you've just developed on your own?
I've taken a few, evening classes at colleges. I've taken a couple of watercolor courses. I took one with a woman in Marin County where I live, and she's a brilliant artist. She was an awful teacher. It was a plein air class, and she'd go out with us and she'd say, "Oh, I see a great swath of trees coming down to the lake." And hers would look like a great swath of trees coming down to the lake, and mine would look like a green smudge here and a blue smudge there. So I gave up on her. But occasionally you get a teacher who really can teach you something, and then you go, "Oh, this is really good." But no, I think I have to do classes because else you don't do it. You need the motivation for working and showing somebody. But when you paint, I did a lot of painting during the pandemic, actually. Because when you're painting, you're completely focused. You can't think of anything else. You can't worry. You can't, you're just there. You're working on that piece. And that's 3 or 4 hours that you're sitting and working without thinking of anything else. So it's very comforting.
So a few more questions in regards to your sketches. Do you think you'd ever have like an illustrated edition, for instance, of your books, or would you like to see that happen? Or a collection of your sketching?
I thought about, I'm guest of honor at Malice next year. I think I will frame one of my sketches and give it to them to auction off, maybe. That will be, I don't think, my work is my work's amateurish because you've seen the one, I sketch, I don't do fantastic paintings. You get sketches from me, so, so I can't see myself illustrating books ever. But it was very nice. I'm very, very flattered that that's on the cover of the book. It's a nice thing to have.
Maybe it will be a trend. Maybe now your publishers will. I was going to mention that I think that the Amazon group of publishing has done a really great thing. This is, I'll show it again, but there are other covers where you don't normally think when we in the bookstore, right, PK? We don't normally think when the books come in that we'll take off the covers and look at the book without the cover.
Yeah.
But I'm now deciding that it's important to do that because there are lovely treats that can be hidden behind the dust jacket and make it a nicer book to own. I just am not programmed that way. So it's been interesting to see it happen.
I guess because I'm so used to milering everybody's books,
yeah,
that I tend to notice those little surprises and those little neat tricks that they do, but most people wouldn't. Rhys, people were also wondering about your book club or your books and being so good for book clubs. And so I have a question myself. What do you think it is about your books that attracts book clubs and are so good for book club groups?
Well, there's a lot of things to talk about. Obviously the setting is a lot to talk about. Two different time periods in some of my books. Why would, what was similar about those time periods? What was different? What what parallels can you make between the lives of the two heroines? And in this one, in the Venice sketchbook, an immediate question is, why doesn't Caroline go and get her son from when he's with his father? And so I think I write very human characters that have lives outside of, some of my books are mysteries, but my characters have lives that are quite identifiable. People have children, people lose relatives. And so there's a lot to talk about in would I do this, would I do that? In the Tuscan Child, would I have taken that risk to go and save Hugo? And so I think there is a lot to talk about, and moral ambiguities too are always good to discuss, aren't they? That is this the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? In Farley Field, what would have driven the perpetrator to do what he did? I'm not telling you anymore in case you want to read the book. Are there more questions, Patrick?
I think that ties up a lot of great compliments. People really love your books and love your work.
Oh, yeah.
So many nice. When you're done with this, I think You'll need to go through and read a lot of these because they're just really lovely. A lot that you've impacted so many people's lives and have helped them through the pandemic. So thank you,
That's,
Rhys.
that was an amazing thing that I have heard again and again and again. I've got letters from people saying, your books have helped me through a very difficult time. There are people who've been isolated alone, shut up alone in an apartment somewhere. And I think we've all been really worried. I know I had this underlying, that's why I read the comfort books, underlying worry for a year. Like, I'm going to be really careful, but what if I make one mistake and that one mistake kills my husband? That's the sort of thing that hung over our heads for a whole year. And so I've had a lot of people say to me, I've been through the whole Royal Spinus series again, and I've been through the whole Molly series again, and it's really comforting to go back and see them. So, I think for a writer, it's rather humbling. You think when you're writing a book, you're writing a book to entertain, and to think that you're actually doing a little bit of good when you write the book is rather a special thing. I think it feels really nice to know that you can make a bit of difference. And that's one of the reasons during the whole of the pandemic, I kept my Facebook page so active. I literally posted almost every day on Facebook because I realized that the people who were on my Facebook page needed to talk. They were people who were shut up alone, and they were people who were scared, and just like me. So I had a lot of discussions on my Facebook page about the most mundane of things, about, I hate ironing, I'm not good at ironing. And then I'd get 300 comments like, well, I like ironing, I'm really good at it. Well, I hate ironing too. So I deliberately did things that touched everybody's life so we could all chat about them. And I think that turned out to be very important.
Well, you've already mentioned, Rhys, that you create a family when you're writing in the 2 series. You create, well, 3 series really, because I've read all the Evan books as you wrote them. So, and that's a wonderful thing for people to step into, is the embrace of a family when times are difficult, and to follow them along. And as you say, your characters are very human. They're not superheroes, they're not super villains. And so it's very comforting to spend time with them. And there is humor, not so much in the standalones, but certainly the Lady Georgie books are infused with humor. I mean, you obviously adore Queenie, who is a source of constant amusement. And,
I love writing about Fig and making her be so awful. She's a lot of fun too. But yeah, people write to me all the time, and it's funny. Nobody ever writes to me and says, well, I found the plot in that last book was really clever, that twist at the end. They write to me and they say, I love Queenie, I love Grandad, I love Zuzu, they become very fond of the characters.
But I don't think that that's a comment on your plotting, which I think is very good. It's just that, they're obviously wanting to spend time with the characters. But I also think that you've been, over the years, because I've read all of your books, you've been very good about not repeating stories, there's no sense of recognition, when I'm starting one thinking, oh, she's already done that, or, it'll go this way. So, you've been brilliant about maintaining characters and landscapes, which are super important. I read for landscape as much as I do for character, because like you, I love to travel, and, that's a real joy. But you also always deliver a good story.
Yeah. I write the book that I want to read, but it's not sitting on a shelf. So I go and write it.
That seems like a really wizard plan. Well, on that note, let me salute you once again.
Oh, thank you, my dear.
Happy book launch. The official publication day is Tuesday, as I've said. And as I've also mentioned, and will again, you can see from the little sign here that Rhys has been in and signed all of our books. And if you have a personalization request, since Rhys will be in town for a little while longer, you could certainly make that, and
I'll come over and sign it for you. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get the books done for you that way. So thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And Rhys, I will see you for dinner.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in the middle of a lovely Saturday afternoon. I appreciate it. Thank you again.
Yes. Thank you, Patrick, for your usual excellent job. And bye.
Bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.